It is now time to elevate.
Time to motivate them.
Let's engage. It is now time to elevate.
Hey everyone. Thanks so much for staying tuned in to another episode of Engage, Motivate, and Elevate. I'm your host, Monet Fox, and I appreciate you being here. Today, we're going to have another discussion around education, some of the disparities that exist within our urban communities for our young boys and girls in the education system, and also some solutions that we can implement not only as educators, but also as parents to help them to understand that they matter, that they are worthy, that we love and respect them, that they are resilient and strong and can be confident in their development. So I hope that you enjoy this program. The guest that we're speaking of has had about 25 years of experience working in a variety of roles within the Cambridge public school system, the Boston public school system, and now she's serving as a deputy superintendent. Her name is Nicole Gittens, and so I'm super excited to have her here. I know that this is going to be a show that we'll all be able to really benefit from, so make sure you stay tuned in for the whole thing. Hi, Nicole. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Miss Monet?
I'm doing so good. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'm really excited to get started talking to you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So Nicole, again, she's been an educator for about 25 years now, right? Why don't you let us know where you really got started along your career path in education?
Sure. So I went to undergrad for finance, and I added business law once I was there because it just made sense. I could do those two majors at the same time. I really thought I was going to be some business tycoon. I guess. I don't know. I don't even know why I thought that. I don't know anybody who's done business that I was like, oh, I want to do that. I just thought business, money, the whole thing kind of went together.
That's a smart choice, right?
Right. Like, I'm like, why not? Math has always been my thing. Like, I've, had solid math skill. I just like numbers and crunching numbers and, all types of stuff like that. And so I went to undergraduate at Temple University in Philadelphia. And when I was there, like, even when I was in high school, I had two jobs. Like, Don't ask me why. I wasn't that kid that needed to do that. Like, I don't have a sob story where I had to, feed myself or anything like that. My mother used to actually look at me like, why do you work so, like, for what? What are you doing this for? You don't have to buy anything for yourself. You don't have to pay for, like, you're going to work for the rest of your life. Don't work now. That's how I grew up with that mindset. But I still just always had jobs. And the same thing when I went to college, I had a job and then I got another job, because if you worked for the athletic department at the time, you could get free books and get paid, right? And so I was like, ooh, I can keep the money that my mother sends me for books and spend it on something else and do this job. And they were looking for a math tutor. And I was like, easy breezy. Like, not a lot of people were strong in math. So I worked for the athletic department. Temple's a Division I school. And so I worked with the football team. And I remember, we had, I don't know, 3 times a week, I think we did study hall. And so I had a group of guys that weren't able to pass their math classes to, like, move forward. And they were all black men, men, kids, whatever we were at the time. And so I ended up, just working with them, and I was like teaching them stuff and they were learning. And I was like, well, why don't y'all know this already? And they said, we didn't have to do work in school. Like, we were the star athletes. Right. So we never learned it before. It wasn't that they couldn't learn it. Like, to me, I was like, oh, is that where that whole dumb jock thing comes from? Because they weren't expected to learn. And I just remember being, like, mortified. And also at the same time, finding, like, I really enjoyed teaching and seeing that progress that people were making, with my support. And so I thought about, at the time, changing my major, but I was so deep into it. I think I was a junior in college, and I was like, if I change my major to education, I'm going to be in school forever. Never mind, blah, blah. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. Yeah. And so after I graduated, this is how long ago this was. I was sitting at my desk the job that I had fresh out of college, and I had been there for about 2.5 years. I was sitting at my desk one day and I just kept being like, I really want to teach. I actually, even in that job, started teaching people how to use the purchasing system. I worked in the purchasing office. And so I started teaching people how to do that. And they were like learning like this. And I loved teaching the class. It was a little dumb 30-minute class that I taught. And I just loved it. One day I was sitting at my desk and I just opened up the yellow pages seriously and was like, I want to be a teacher. Don't ask me. I don't even know how I found in the yellow pages Simmons College at the time. It's Simmons
The
University.
yellow pages, you definitely are dating yourself. I don't think anyone knows.
Listen,
any of our young children looking at it now.
That's
So
how
that's what
long
Google.
ago it was.
That's what Google is
That
today.
was, that
Google
was,
search.
that was paper Google. This
exactly.
is yellow, right?
Right.
And so that's what I literally ended up, then I called and I got an interview and I was like, oh, I don't have any money to go to school. So then I had to like go through a process, apply for financial aid. I mean, I probably at the most random time of the year was like, I want to go back to school.
Yeah.
Not like on a semester, it was just what was coming to me. And so I ended up, leaving my job and going back to school full time. I had the support of my parents at the time. My mother was my landlord, so she was working with me. My dad was like, I'll pay your car note so you can do this. And that's what I did.
I want to stop you here because this is really interesting. I want to back up before, still when you grew up in Cambridge, right? You grew up in Cambridge, Mass.
Yep.
And you have both your parents supporting you. And this is really a big thing, right? Because a lot of children in urban communities, they might not come from 2-parent households. And even if they do, they might not have parents that are in a position to be able to support.
Correct.
So talk a little bit about that even before you got out of the house, what it was like for you growing up, because it sounds like you have a really strong work ethic, that just was kind of embedded in you. Did that come from one of your parents or was that just something?
Both of my parents worked. So let me just back up to say that I came from a single parent home.
Oh, you did? Okay.
My parents separated and divorced, separated when I was like 9 years old, but we were all from Cambridge. My grandparents were friends on both sides. There was nowhere to go. And there was a commitment from everybody in our family to support us. We had a real village, grandparents, great aunts and uncles, like people just took care of us. And so I think, my dad, even though he didn't live in the home, he lived around the corner. We saw him often, all the time. You know what I mean? He was a police officer. And so he was just ever present. They came together to raise us, to support us. It was not, it wasn't one of those, we didn't have a contentious, it might have been contentious to my parents at some point, but they were both mature enough to not bring that to the kids. You know what I mean? And
how many siblings do you have?
I have 5. There's 5 of us. I have 4 sisters.
All girls. Wow.
All girls. My poor dad. God rest his soul. Poor guy. I'm the firstborn, but not the oldest. I have an older sister who's adopted.
Okay.
Who was adopted right around the time my parents were getting separated or, going through their divorce. So my dad, even still, my sister looks at him as her dad. And then I have a sister right under me, same mother, same father. And then I have 2 other sisters who have their own mother. My dad had kids after he was, separated from my mother. And
now,
again,
a lot of times divorce kind of traumatizes children, but it sounds like for you, because your parents were responsible enough or mature enough to really still effectively, the term now is co-parent, right?
Yeah.
To effectively co-parent you guys, there was still plenty of opportunity for you and your sisters to gain a level of success.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we went to therapy when my parents got divorced. My mother was like, we're going to go to therapy. We were like, wow. I don't think we were traumatized. It was a good experience. My dad was a part of it. We would go weekly. There was times where we would, just me and my younger sister. And then it would be like my mom, my dad, or all of us together. We did we did that back in the 80s when people probably weren't really talking about therapy. I don't know what, somebody must have told my mother that.
She was
About,
apparently ahead of her time, because now it is
Yes.
something that is definitely really
Yes.
important, even for young children. I mean, we get a lot of the trauma that we experience comes from our core family structure. So to be able to give that to you, or even have the thoughtfulness or the mindset around, maybe perhaps these kids need this thing, and to be able to provide that, I think that it speaks volumes.
She used to drag us there. We were kind of like, why do we have to do this? Like, we're all cool. We're happy. Like,
Everything
but
is good.
Again, we were so young that, even if we didn't need it, I'm glad that she thought that was important to do anyway. You know what I mean? And also had the resource to do it. You know what I mean? There's just not it. People oftentimes don't think of things when they're like trying to put food on the table. Like, you have money.
They're not able to, or they're so stressed out, they cannot think about those things. There are things that are more pressing in their own household. Think about, we talked briefly before this around the difference between surviving and living, right? You had an opportunity to live, where some households are growing up trying to survive, and so that struggle is a lot different. It looks a lot different for their children, and it looks a lot different in terms of the opportunities that you want to provide for your children than other households. And so I want to talk about that too, because fast forward to your days at Tempo, you got so many degrees. I mean, you have a lot, right? You're like a career student, which is a brag. It's not an insult. It is definitely a compliment.
Listen, I have one of my friends that's like, oh, God damn it, you're in school again.
So back to school. So you have tons of degrees, but you also have a master's in education leadership, right?
Yes.
Am I saying that right? Okay.
Yes.
So in that, in your master's in education leadership, I really want to talk about, because this show is about bridging these gaps, right? These socioeconomic gaps in urban communities. So I really want to talk about some of the things that you've seen throughout your career that really highlight some of the disadvantages that that children of color experience, some of the opportunities that exist for them, some things that you feel like could be improved. Just kind of go over the scope of work that you do and how that relates to those things.
One of the things that, that you do when you're when you're trying to be responsible in public education, my career has always been in public education. It is like, what is missing? What do people need? And how do we get that? And then you start to pay attention. Like, I literally went back to school to get my master's in educational leadership, just being nosy. Like, how are they making these decisions? I just literally wanted to formally understand that. I didn't have any intention in going into leadership. I just wanted to know. That's how I ended up in most of my educational opportunities, has been just me being like, who, what? Just really trying to think that through. And so what I've found is that, and this is not everybody, it's that our families, I would say, are more trusting to school systems and expect that if I send my kid to school, they're going to get what they need. That's what I have to do to be an involved parent. And that should be true, but it's not necessarily, right? And so what ends up happening, I think, a lot of times is people who are educated know how to navigate the system, right? Educated people beget educated children. And so you think about how often, just thinking about how you talked about your experience growing up and your mom not necessarily placing a high value on education. It's not because she doesn't want good for you. It's that she doesn't know that that's important, because it's not been what's allowed her to get through life. People are surviving. And so when you feel like, a lot of times our families haven't had a good experience in education themselves. The last time they were in school, they was like, when I'm done with this, I'm done. And they don't want to necessarily come back, show up, ask questions, because people don't think they necessarily have the right to do that. And I think that's what I've discovered is the difference between how kids in our community are educated and how kids in other communities are educated, where there is this perspective where people feel like they are entitled. It is their right to ask questions, to push on things. And that's everybody's right. And at the same time, we shouldn't have to do that in order to get what we need for our kids, right? We should be setting up school systems that address the needs of students. Low-income people, no matter what their race is, have a very similar experience in school, except people don't assume that, let me say this way. People assume oftentimes that Black and brown children come from poor families. It's an assumption. It doesn't matter what the parent background is. It's literally what people assume when they see kids of color, is that you are coming from a certain background. You had a certain experience that might not be true. It wasn't true in my life, but I also think about how involved my mother was in the college application process. She worked at a university, so she was on top of all of those things. And I look at my friends who didn't end up where I ended up, going right to college right after school. And it was because their parents were expecting that you would get that information through school. And that's not always happening. And unfortunately, it's not happening at large enough rates that you can almost see, the outcomes ahead of time, right? If you don't have parents who know what to do and how to get what they need, and how to use even outside resources, then you're not going to get that. And that's the thing that I feel like is my responsibility, to make sure that the schools that I work in and the systems that I work in are thinking about those families who don't know how to navigate. Because otherwise, what would make us any different than being a part of a caste system like something like India? You're born a farmer, you stay a farmer. You're born, into a family who's not educated, you stay uneducated. That doesn't even make sense, especially not what this society or the United States says that they are about. And I think,
how frustrating is it for you, Nicole, when you see, because you have this understanding, right? And I can only imagine, it makes me frustrated hearing it, right? And I don't even have a full understanding, but how frustrating is it for you, or even is it, right? Frustrating for you to understand that there is a very deliberate or conscious, I'm not sure if it's so conscious, because like you said, educators beget educated children. So it's just kind of like a role that parents that have been educated will take for their children. For parents that don't understand that, and for you to kind of sit on the cusp of that understanding, right? Because you see both sides of it. What type of motivation or frustration or feelings does that give to you as an educator for the, say that a child who you believe is extremely bright and whose parents just do not have this understanding?
yeah.
What type of, how does that work for you in your career?
How does it work? What's frustrating, I would say, is that the institution of education, people talk about, institutions, right? And so how education comes together is to teach kids between this hour and that hour these certain concepts, right? And so if you come to school, so you see that kids who are more school ready than others have a different experience in that school environment. What is important to think about too is if we are educating the whole child, we have to give the whole child what they need. And we just don't have the structures in a public school system. We don't have the structures in the day to meet all of those needs. We just do not. And so the frustrating part is we're not set up for that. People literally, when you're a teacher, you come to school to teach. I didn't come to, feed kids, and you do it, but you do it usually out of the goodness of your own heart or in your own pocket, right? And so you don't necessarily fully understand how to pull all the resources together for them to make sense. There's a lot of competing for time and for resource that happens because we have, when we don't always organize our structures in a way that makes the most sense. So you start to see like, well, wait a minute, this program for this kid needs all of these components, but they're happening all at the same time. Or, if you pull them out of class to give them a certain support, they're missing something in the classroom because that classroom continues on, right? And so how do you figure out how to puzzle all those things together when there's so many competing interests and so many different ideas? And in the meanwhile, you're thinking about how do you build this thing? You're actually doing your own job at the same time, right? And so people just miss pieces upon pieces. Some of it is intentional, but much of it is not. And it's almost like if you think about, a speedboat and how quickly a speedboat can turn around, like you've seen them, like they can make a hairpin turn, right? But when you think about a cruise ship and what it takes to turn a cruise ship around, it has to go out and back. That's kind of how education works. It's not nimble. There are layers to it. There are, if you're talking about public education, you're talking about like what works for the union. I appreciate, the idea that we have to make sure that what we ask teachers to do is doable and that we're not asking them to do things that they don't have the skill to do. Like we need to always be thinking about all these different pieces. But there's politics involved. I mean, the last place you think, when you think about education, you don't think about politics, do you? Like you shouldn't. It's antithetical to what makes sense. But that's something that's huge. Like what if you do this thing, what are those people going to think, and who's going to vote for who, and who's going to be on school board? It gets very complex. And that's the thing that's really important to understand. Now, does that mean it's impossible to get what you need in the school system? Not at all. It just means you have to be intentional. Right. Teachers have to be intentional. Parents have to be intentional. School leaders have to be intentional. Superintendents have to be intentional. What are we trying to do? And how do we make sure all these pieces come together? Right. The challenge,
understanding all the pieces, I feel like it's difficult sometimes. Yeah, when the leaders that are sitting around the round table and making decisions don't understand the level of disparity, or don't understand the specific needs of certain children, or don't understand how to really support a household in a way that their child is receiving the level of education that they need, then it becomes a little bit more staggered and a little bit more difficult for that child in particular, because there is no understanding in the right people in play. I always feel like when it comes to boardroom meetings and things like that, and even, I used to be an on-air radio personality, and one thing I'll say all the time is that there were certain people that I kept around me, even though my mind was out of the environment that I was in. I was already forward thinking, but I kept people around me that were still, for lack of a better term, hooded and still in the streets, because they kept me grounded. It kept me, I still understood what the street, what still mattered in the street. And so I think that even though it sounds so simplistic, and some people may even disregard how important that is or how relevant it is, but I think that when you include components of the actual environment that you are trying to support, then you are getting a better feel, a better realization of what's necessary for these children.
Right. Now, remember, I told you, like, I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth, but I also didn't grow up crazy. Like the lights were always on. We always had food. We had vacations, even if it was just to go down the Cape for a weekend. Like we had experiences, right? And so, even as a Black woman, I don't understand the plight of all Black people, right? And so you can't just have me at the table, although I have probably a broader range of understanding and experience, because I still have friends and family who are, 2 steps out of poverty, 1 step out of poverty, some still in poverty. Like, you know what I mean? I'm not that far gone that I don't have family members who, you know, still don't have life insurance and will die and leave you with a bill. You know what I mean? Like this is real talk, right? And so I also have the ability to think about how people are trying to make it in the world, right? I would tell, when I was a principal, I would tell my teachers, like, listen, if a kid shows up at all, understand that's a parent being involved. So like, if you don't get in touch with the parent and they don't show up to a meeting, do what you can do with that kid while they're sitting in front of you, right? Treat them like they're your own. What would you want for your child? Because at the end of the day, all humans want the same thing. They want to be respected. They want to feel like they can take care of themselves and take care of their families. And they want to feel like, you know, people think they matter. They actually do, you know what I mean? Whether you can get into the conversation or not. I think a lot about, like, I never, you know, like I said, my dad was a police officer. He had a flexible enough schedule that if we needed something, he could take his lunch break, come up to school, do whatever, right? My mother, the same way. Like, she wasn't an hourly worker. So if she needed to take personal time off from work to do stuff for us for school or to show up, she could. But there's so many people who, if they don't go to work, they don't get paid. And the only time we have to meet with them is between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. or whatever whatever the schedule is. And that doesn't work for them. They don't show up. They can't. You know what I mean? When people are making a decision between feeding their family and showing up about this kid that don't have it right, I don't have the answer. I don't know. You know, like, people also have a sense of pride and embarrassment. Imagine someone telling you your son keeps doing the same thing you telling him not to do. And now they want you to come up to school and talk about that. How embarrassed are you as a parent to not be able to, like, I can't make him stop. He's going to keep doing this thing. You know what I mean? Like, in some situations, that's exactly how it is. Right. So, you know, people are living their lives. And like you said, some people are living, some people are surviving, and some people are in between. And we have to be thinking about that.
How do you think that the impact of, you know, if you have, I know we talked about how sometimes with educators, particularly Caucasian educators, how sometimes they see a person's skin and it changes the assumption, right? They assume different things about that child, either they're poor or they, you know, or they, in last week when we spoke to Akil, he mentioned that there have been educators in the district that he works in that have even made him as a grown man feel inadequate, you know, on certain levels. And he understood that has to do sometimes with the color of his skin. You know, you're in a leadership role as well. My first question is, have you ever been made to feel inadequate by any of your colleagues? And then two, do you feel that this is something that, because what I suggested to Akil, I said, you know, well, perhaps these educators need to have training sessions on either it's realizing that we're all just human beings, you know, like the color shouldn't matter, you know, we should all be educated the same way, you know, but you know, sometimes I do believe that if a person displays a level of racism, sometimes I do believe that there is an ignorance around even their display. You know, they don't always recognize that they are being this way. You know, sometimes they do, for sure. I do believe that sometimes it's just kind of like their own, the way that they were raised, the way that their imagery is. You know, we talked about reality TV and how that kind of displays a certain imagery. So if you don't have Black friends in the house and understand that every woman ain't catty and every woman ain't talking behind their friend's back and every woman ain't, you know, every Black woman's not doing that, but this is the representation that you see on TV, then you can become stereotypical because it's what we see. You know, it's what the media portrays us. And right. So, you know, I know that that's super loaded. You know, you can unpack it.
Yeah, so super loaded. But, you know, it's interesting to me that no matter what we see, because look, reality TV, even for white folks, is not a promising, like it doesn't look good for them either, right? But for some reason, people are able to lump us into one category. I don't know why. I can't wrap my brain around it. And especially for Black people. And then after that, brown people, there's just this thing that makes people think that there's a monolithic experience, and there's not. It's impossible, right? You know this. Even if you grew up in the same household with somebody, they had a completely different experience and a completely different memory of an exactly same scenario. Like, we were both sitting at the dining room table at the same time, but you saw that and I saw this. How did that shape how people move and think, right? And so we know that as human beings, but for some reason, it's just so much easier to categorize people. So that's what happens. And it happens with us more often because when you look at school systems, even when you're in an urban setting, teachers are predominantly white, right? And they don't necessarily grow up in these areas that and I'm appreciative, because there aren't teachers falling out of the like, there's just not a surplus of teachers, right? So you need all different types of people to teach, but people have to be willing to, I think, understand who they're teaching, understand the communities that they're working in. Because I think a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this myself, when I first started teaching, I was like, let me help kids be more like me. That negates everything that they come with, right? And so respecting and looking at people from an asset-based mindset, that like everybody brings something to the table. People aren't coming here begging you for your wisdom. They're coming here for you to do your job. It's teach the ABCs or to teach the 1, 2, 3s or whatever it is that you're supposed to do. And so what I think has happened, and I don't think that people have, I can't remember the word you used about people marginalizing me, because
making you feel inadequate on any level.
Making me feel inadequate. I think I can't say that that's what inadequate wouldn't be the right word. I think the word would be, or the phrase would be, they've made me think or tried to make me feel like what I know to be right and good for all children is only supportive of kids who look like me, right? And so I'm like, when you think about the classroom experience and you think about, there's, a teacher has a class of 25 kids maybe, right? At a time, depending on where you are. It might be 32, might be 35, who knows, right? But those are all individuals, right? All of them. And so it's your responsibility as a teacher, no matter how hard it is, to try your best to get to know every single kid in that classroom and what they need and what you can do to influence that, right? And so, I think about a district that I did my research in, my doctoral research, and, it's a blue collar community, I would say, if you would to categorize it. And the teachers in the particular school that I observed and visited, and they were doing amazing work with low income kids, a significant population of homeless students who had never lived in homes. They had been living in shelters their entire life. And by the time you get to school, you're already 5. So that means if you've been living in a shelter for 5 years, you've never had a home that's your own. Right. They recognized that was an issue and that kids would come with those issues. However, they didn't stop there. And these are white folks. These are, like, not super eloquent. Sometimes we look for the most, what school did they go to, and who, who do they know, and like all of that, all of those things that we have been made to think is important. And really, it's like, what's here in this person's heart? And I can remember talking to one of the kindergarten teachers, and she said, my job is to make sure that my kids are all reading on grade level by the time they finish kindergarten. She said, and every year it's getting harder and harder. Right now, we're getting the influx of kids who are born addicted to opioids. The parents, it's a mess. It's literally a mess in some communities, right? And she said, I set a goal for 100% of my students, because if I set a goal for 80% of them, like, I'm already telling myself there's some kids in this class who don't deserve to learn how to read. So I'm listening to her going, if people thought like this in education everywhere, we'd be in a different place, right? And she said, it's not easy. She said, she said, I cry every year when I set my goal because I just know it's impossible. It's not going to happen. She said, but I keep trying. I feel supported by my principal. I feel supported by my colleagues. I know I can ask for help without people looking at me like there's something wrong. And I also know that as bad as these kids' lives are, if I hug them all day, and if I, feel bad for what they might not have gotten if they didn't have dinner last night, she said that I can't do anything about that. But what I can do is try to teach them how to read. Right. If everybody thought like that, we'd be making huge gains, right? But people get stuck in, there's almost this liberal, like, oh my God, I feel so bad. And that feeling bad translates into, let me let this little Black boy act up all day. Let me not even tell his mother, like you're a mom of a Black boy. If you knew your son was acting like a clown in school all day, you would be very upset. Yeah. And if you found out that a teacher didn't want to call you because she didn't want to feel like she was being racist by having a conversation with a Black parent about a Black child, it's people make stuff up that really isn't a real thing. Call the mother first. And then if she calls you a racist, kind of try to unpack that. But usually moms want to hear this stuff. Parents want to hear what's going on with their kids. And I tell my friends this all the time who have kids in school. When your kid's been acting up for 3 weeks, and you just get a call and you're upset with them, you need to be upset with the teacher. Right. Children do what you allow them to do, right? And then you need to have that conversation with the teacher, like, we don't accept this in our family. We don't, because again, people think our children are so different, right. And they're not. They're just kids. And every kid, I don't care what race they are, what language they speak, they get away with what they can get away with, right?
It's always thrown me off. I'm sorry to cut you off. It's always thrown me off because I'm a very involved parent, and it's always thrown me off when my son's teachers will commend me for advocating for him. It's always like,
imagine that.
It's so funny to me where, and I've had to actually course correct some of my son's teachers, right? Because they assume that my son is not doing something that he should be doing, and then I'll show them, no, he did do this, and this is the way he did it, and this is what he understood to be right. Well, I'm sorry, the other teacher got it. Well, there is a responsibility that you have as well within your role is to speak to these other teachers to see if they got it before you call me telling me that my son didn't do something. And so there's been several times where I've had to, take those kinds of steps, but it always gets met with, oh, Miss Fox, you love your son so much, and you're doing such a great job, and oh my goodness, and that for me is, I have to like, calm down, girl, because the question should not be an expectation that I don't care about my, and that's what that kind of is frustrating for me, to be honest, because there's almost this hidden, oh my goodness, you love your son, congratulations. That's the sense that they're giving me, like, oh my goodness, you're willing to advocate. Congratulations to you, Mom. You're so great. And it's like, well, wait a minute.
And
what do you think about Black families? Like, do you feel like we don't want these things for our children? Like, what is your understanding? And I think that then when you ask those kinds of questions, and you become something that they feel is difficult to deal with. It's like, well, I'm curious. I want to understand.
Yes. So what you just said can sum up my experience as an educator at the levels that I have, now that I'm working in central office and I'm right, under the superintendent.
You're a deputy superintendent now.
Yes. Yep. Yes. So it's like, vice superintendent, right?
Yeah.
But when you ask questions, that's what I think I've gotten, is that people are uncomfortable with me asking questions.
Really?
That's my job. Right. if I walk out of a conversation that I don't understand something or it doesn't make sense and I don't ask questions, that's my fault. I refuse to do that. And I can remember we have the district I work in does this like a program for the girls of color. Every year they do a conference. And I remember one of the girls, she was like, I think she might have been a senior in high school. And and she was talking about how she felt uncomfortable asking questions because she feels like everybody already knows the answer, right? And I'm like, honey, a lot of people pretend like they know the answer. I think that's white politeness. And I just had the conversation with my superintendent about that. I said, why when you walk, because I know he's like, doesn't know some of the things that people are asking about, right? Or trying to get him to, like, people say a lot of flowery words, like, get to the point. You know what I mean? Like, what are we talking about? Come on, we got work to do, right? And so I asked him, I said, maybe that's one of the reasons why I struggle to connect with people, is because I don't pretend I know what you're talking about. And if you have to explain something to me and you can't, then you don't know what you're talking about. And so that's one of the things that it took me a long time to learn. Like, be comfortable when somebody's talking in circles at you. You know when someone's talking. You know what I mean? Like, don't let people try to play you. And so for us to get to a place where we're comfortable asking questions and they're comfortable receiving questions, and understanding that you're not just going to accept any statement that is made. That's really an important step to make in life, period. But in the education system, when we're working with our kids, when your child is vulnerable in a vulnerable situation in school and you don't feel like they're getting what they need, and someone's saying something to you that doesn't make sense, tell them to break it down to you, like, seriously, and don't feel any shame about it. And that's one of the things I told that girl. I said, this will change your life. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Be afraid to come unprepared to a situation. Like, don't ask questions because you didn't prepare yourself. But if someone's talking to you and you don't know what they're talking about, ask them. Because I guarantee you, if you got the question, there's probably another 4 people in the room that have the same question you have. Yeah. We allow that to happen in schools. We allow it to happen in our medical care. You know, we don't want to ask the doctor too many questions. We don't want them to be offended. It is our bodies. Like, people are supposed to answer us when it comes to our family, our bodies, our health, our education. We're the recipients of the goods. We deserve the answers. We deserve to ask whatever questions we have. And
I think that's part of, when I talked about feeling inadequate, I guess, intimidated is probably part of that, right? Because some people feel very intimidated to ask questions, and because, like you said, this, in the South, they call it Southern hospitality. Up North, I don't know what we call it here. Like, I like the flowery words, right? I don't know what it's actually titled, but it definitely is a preset way of speaking, that I feel like some people have adopted to kind of to not really answer the question, but to smooth out the disagreement. And it's like, there is no disagreement if you can answer my question. I'm simply asking a question. There is no problem here. And I think that, part of the image of Black women, Black men, in the way that society has over the years just kind of like criminalized us. And even we look at one another sometimes in that same way, unfortunately, is that aggressive. We can't be direct. We don't get to be direct almost. And it's like, well, wait a minute, like, why do I have to, and we talked about this too, why do I have to tone down my truth or my level of understanding when it is your responsibility to help me to understand it? So if I don't understand it, or if you're explaining it, as you said, in circles, or you're going around, or you're just complimenting me for trying to understand it, but still not explaining it, then wait a minute, you have to take your own responsibility in that role and say, you know what, let me just tell her like it is. I think you and I think it was us. We had a conversation prior to today. We talked about children with special needs and some of the challenges that parents face when they have children that have special needs and things like that. And one of the things that you said to me that stood out to me really heavy was that when a parent has a child with special needs, it's really important for them to understand that depending on what the special need is, their child may always have that need. It's not something that it gets to a point and it's like, okay, well, now they know and now it's done. If they have a challenge with reading, that challenge will probably always exist. You know, if they have a challenge with, you know, sentence structure, whatever the challenge is, it may always exist. So that child has to work harder to get to the baseline, right? Yeah. And so the parent's expectation is that these educators should be doing more or should be trying harder, when the reality is that your child has to try harder. You as a parent have to then push and say, hey, listen, this is what's necessary for you to get to the baseline. So let's always try to make it to the baseline, right? And then if we can excel, then let's excel, but let's at least try to get it to the baseline. But it's the concept of not wanting the parents to be upset so they're not given the truth. You know, right. And that to me is far more frustrating.
Yeah, I think, you know, it is our job as educators to always give hope, right? And so I want to give a little more nuance to what you were talking about, right? When you think about a disability, physical disability, like you would never tell someone with a spinal cord injury, get up and walk. What's wrong with you? Like, you could, enough with that wheelchair. You've been in that wheelchair for 5 years now. You know what I mean? Like, you don't say that, right? And so I think we think about learning disabilities the same way, is that there'll be a thing that happens that'll make it go away. And really the job and the responsibility is, what can we ameliorate through structures and supports and different programs, different reading programs that can sometimes teach kids how to read with different structures than the typical reading instruction that happens in a classroom, right? Kids will learn how to read. You probably have seen this with your own son. Like if you read the same book over and over again, they kind of know, they start to get sight words. And then there's like another level at which you need to be able to read, where you can fluently read. You're not just reading a word like cat, hat, but you're like fluently reading a sentence in a paragraph. And then you're like, are you able to make sense of what you just read? And so there's all those different layers to it. I think what's important is that we make sure that you understand what the disability is and what you can expect. Like, what progress can you expect? What is typical of a child with this learning profile, right? What are the things that there's tons of research behind most things that happen in school, right? Except for, you know, some off-cuff things that we might try, but there's research behind things. So you can ask those questions like, so what can I expect my child to be able to do? Can I expect them to get up to grade level reading? Do I need to, you know, will they always need these academic supports? Ask those questions. What are the goals that you're setting? Your child should be able to, you know, with outside of significant intellectual impairment, right? They should be able to access grade level content with the supports that come through special education. It shouldn't be that they are now doing less than grade level content because they have a learning disability. But it should be like, what are the supports that get your kid to that level to really understand and be able to do work on grade level as they should? Because if your expectation is your child is going to be out there gainfully employed, go to college and all that other stuff, then they have to learn how to deal with the disability. They have to learn how to take advantage of some of the structures and supports and the ways that, and special education is not my field, specifically. I'm general education, but they have to be able to you know, use some of the little skills and nuances and all of those things in order to get past and accommodate their learning disability. And so it's no one's ever going to tell a parent like, yeah, kid's just never going to be able to read. They're going to keep trying. And what we've learned, I was talking to one of the coordinators in my district who works on literacy. What we've learned now is, before we were talking about, as long as kids are reading on grade level by third grade, we're good. But now they're finding, like, the earlier you identify learning disabilities, the greater chance, like, the brain is more malleable when it's young. You know how young kids can learn things really quickly, and it takes us a little bit longer. The older you get, the longer it takes for you to learn something new. Well, we're learning, like, if you identify kids by the middle of first grade sometimes with some learning disabilities and intervene, that you're able to kind of change the trajectory of a child's life. And so third grade is not necessarily the place by which you mark whether or not kids have learned. You need to pay attention early on. And we keep learning more and more about the brain. And so who knows, there might be something that by the time they're 6 months old, if they can look this way and that way, like, oh, that's something we need to address. The more brain research that's out there, the more we will be able to learn and address those disabilities.
Now, how about you? Do you think that you'll be going back to school anytime soon to learn anything else?
No.
You're done. Okay.
No, I'm done. I'm so done. Listen, I was looking, and I think I won't pay off my student loans until I'm well into my 70s. I'll be retired and my student loans come in. Okay. Like,
maybe you'll get relieved of them. The federal, maybe.
Nice.
That would be nice.
Really nice. I don't know, but unless somebody pays for me to go to school, I'm nosy. So who knows? Like, I'm saying that now.
Right.
And I say nosy, like, I get curious, and I'm like, well, maybe I should take a class on that.
Yeah, I think you're more of a perfectionist. You're a gatherer like me. You want all the information before you come out and speak on it.
Right.
And I don't think anything's wrong with that. I actually commend you for your years of studying, your years of trying to be in the know, understand the things that from the perspective of a person of color, so that you can build more for people of color. I think that it's very important work that you do. And so I definitely commend you, Nicole. You're doing really great work.
I will say this, that, now my focus over the past couple of years, I literally go into classrooms and I look to see what Black boys are doing, if there were any Black boys in the classroom. Because I know that, I believe strongly that if you're educating Black boys well, then everybody else in that classroom will be, educated as well. And I think about, the strength of our community. And if we have a population of men in the Black community who are not educated, and when I say this, I mean, like, formally, in a way that is accepted in society, right? Because I will tell you this, I know some of the smartest, most intellectual people I know are not formally educated. They have some of them not even graduated from high school, right? Have GEDs, and they are incredibly smart, but their needs were not met. They weren't seen in school. So they were like, I'm out of here. What's the point? Right. Yeah. And so, and then in this world, what can you get without a high school diploma? What can you get without a degree? What can you get now without a master's degree almost? You know what I mean? And so when we have that setup where intelligence and formal education aren't linked, we have that in this community so much. It's almost like a barrier to progress. And so I really am concerned about, like, Black men being educated. Seriously. I think, our family structures are upside down, where women don't feel like they are going to be able to meet a man who can make as much money as them. And that whole dynamic that ruins most families is prevalent in the Black community for sure. Right. And so how do we make it possible for our men to be gainfully employed, to be the leaders in the community? They can lead, like, our men, they walk in a room, they own the room. They can, you know what I mean? They can get whatever it is that they need, but then when they don't have those credentials, they can't keep moving forward. And it's painful to watch. And I just, I literally pay attention to that.
Yeah.
I want to see more of that. I want to make sure that, when I think about all of, and I have 3 nephews. And one's too little. He's not even 2 yet, so he's not in school. But my 2 older nephews, both learning disabilities, I guess, you know what I mean? Like, or, are struggling in school. One's in 3rd grade now. And the other one's out of school. He's graduated from high school already, but he struggled in school too. And I'm just like, why is that? Why? Of all the girls in my family, that's not what's happening. Just the boys. What is it with these Black boys that they really don't seem to get what they need in school?
Yeah. It's the same with me and my brother too. I excelled at reading. My brother always struggled. I mean, brilliant dude though. You talk to him, he'll be able to have a conversation. He was very, very intelligent, but he had like a slight form of dyslexia, which, so he struggled through reading all his life. I believe that he still does struggle with that, but he's learned how to manage it. He reads ahead and then he'll come back and read it out loud, so he put certain strategies in place for himself. But I agree with that. That's actually interesting to think about, where a lot of these boys, the way that they're educated or the way that they learn, there's something that is different. There's something that is lacking in the way that they're being educated. And so really trying to understand what that is, I think, is a great,
really important.
Yeah, it's a really, really, it is really important. It's a really great thing to think about.
I mean, when you say that, my sister, one of my sister who's right under me, she has dyslexia, but she's fine. She got a master's degree. Like she made it work. She figured it out. Yeah. I literally feel like there's a thing with Black boys. Yeah. Like there's a thing where people just don't know what to do with their energy. They don't know what to do with their approach to life. I mean, they're just, them, we love them. We know, you know what I mean? Like we get it. I think about my oldest nephew, Isaiah, and I'm like, and his sister, super smart, graduated from the Naval Academy. But he's like intuitive on a level that, if something were to happen, he'll be able to figure that nuance out. You know what I mean? My niece is super smart. His sister's super smart. She's getting ready to go to graduate school. I'm amazed by her. But at the same time, if I was in a gym, I think I would call Isaiah, because he just is like, he's not afraid to try things. He's not, those people I'm talking about, right?
Well, honestly, when you the more that we discuss this, I think that part of it is probably, not having traditionally, women are raising their households. So there is a disconnect automatically between the mother and her son, right? And I've always been one of those moms. I never propose myself or put myself into a father role. I never say I'm the mother and the father. I know some women feel that way. I don't feel that way. I think that there are definitely things that a man can and should provide for young boys. And there's such a disconnect in that, whether it's because of incarceration or, if you're raising your son or want to raise your son in a masculine way, then there's such a large prevalence of homosexuality. So even with men, that's not coming through, in a masculine way as much as it may have been when we were younger. So there's all these different variables that kind of disrupt the household for Black boys, their fathers not being around, or them not being in the household, or them not getting the level of, we're nurturers, moms, like I love my son to death. I love all over him. And sometimes I'm worried, like, am I making him too soft? Am I loving him too much? Because he doesn't have that opposite, discipline and structure like that a man would provide for him. So, it's still a concern for me too. And I wonder if part of the concern that you're bringing up has to do with that, just a simple disconnect in the household.
I would say maybe, but when I look at my family, all the men are present. My sisters are married. They're, my younger sister lives with her. So there's a man there, and there's still something that's not happening in school. They're working people, you know what I mean? Like, they're not home teaching their kids and all that other stuff. I mean, they teach them what they need to be men and, that manliness and all of that. the responsibility of a man to a household, right? And so that is happening for sure. But the academic piece,
I was just going to say the academics.
I literally, I'm like, I think on some level, there's almost like this, feeling like our kids are foreign or not foreign, but like alien to the world, right?
And like Akil said last week, if they're not doing something on like the sports level, then a lot of times the kids are not seen or heard for academics,
Right.
So there could be, so it could be part of that too, where it's just like, oh, well, he's just another Black kid in the class and hopefully he just doesn't cause disruption. But there's never that, like you said, you made a really strong, the word that you use, what you said, asset based, or, like the thought of this is an asset in my class. This young Black boy is an asset in my class.
Yes.
And I'm going to use him as that. And I'm going to serve him as he is that. Instead, it's like, well, I just hope he doesn't disrupt. So let me teach everybody else. And I think that has a lot to do with it too. The way in those types of things, even though it may not be spoken, those kids feel it. We feel that thing, right? So it's not a language that you can necessarily describe and articulate, but it is definitely something that these young Black boys are feeling. That they just don't have a place. And if you don't feel like you have a place, then it affects your self-esteem. It affects the way that you see yourself in the world. It affects the way you see yourself in the classroom or in group environment. And if it starts to affect you in a way where you're just like, well, let me just kind of like fit into this hole that people are trying to push me into. Then I can see that starting to affect the way that you're learning, the way that you're even responding to learning, right? You just want to kind of get through it rather than
enjoy it. Like you're just like doing time, right? When it's going to be over. I'll give you an example. One of my goddaughters goes to a private school, and she had gone from charter school, which was predominantly Black and brown, into a private school. She's really, really good in sports. And when she first started this school, she was the only Black girl in her grade, right? And she was like every day coming home crying. Mommy, I don't want to go to that school. And so I was talking to my cousin. I'm like, listen, don't let her out. She has to make it through. Let me talk to her. And so I talked to her and I said to her, listen, I am often the only Black woman in the room. That's what life is going to be like, unfortunately, right? Especially if you stay in the Boston area. Like if you start to go down south, you might see more of us. And I said, but understand, you have the right to be there. You're smart. And if you don't know something, it's because you haven't learned it yet. Have you ever come into any, learning that you weren't able to accomplish? And she said, no. I said, exactly. So when people are talking about things that you don't know about, it's because you haven't learned them yet. Not that you're incapable, not that you're not smart, not that you don't know. If you didn't travel to, I don't know, Greece, and you can't talk about whatever the thing is. I haven't even been to Greece, so I can't talk about the thing that people might be talking about. Understand this. Ask questions. Really, that's interesting. Tell me more. Because it is interesting. You just haven't had that experience. And that doesn't make you less intelligent. That doesn't make anyone better than you. It makes people have had different experiences than you. And I guarantee you there are things that you know that they don't know. And they'll come up. But be comfortable in who you are. And it's not always going to be comfortable, but you be comfortable in yourself so that even if you're in an environment that's not comfortable, you know who you are. You stand solid and strong, and you know that people love you, and I'm a phone call away. We have to be that for each other. You know what I mean? We have to step into those roles where we support one another in ways that it's a simple phone call sometimes. You know what I mean? It's not rocket science. It is literally like, hang in there, do what you can do. When I think about my time going to college, my mother went to school nights for 10 years before she got her degree because she was already married with kids, working a full-time job. Like that's what it was. When it was time for me to go to college, she was like, first of all, don't apply anywhere in Massachusetts. I don't want you around. you need to go away. I don't want you hanging with your friends who ain't going to college. I don't want you, like she really, and she was serious about it. Like very intentional. When you meet people who are afraid to let their kids go away, that was not my mother. She wasn't like, she was like, you're not going to the West Coast. Like, I need to be able to get to you in a flight.
Right. Not
that
too far, but get away.
Right? But it was like no question about it. And she also told me, get this, you can't come home until Thanksgiving. Who says that? Like, I was homesick. I wanted to come home. I was calling home every day. What are you guys having for dinner? The food's gross in the cafeteria. Like, I was a mess. At least the first few weeks. But I realized if my mother knew that from working in a university, she had that mindset. Like, these kids who go home before Thanksgiving oftentimes don't come back because they're homesick, especially if they're first gen going to school for the first time and your parents don't even know what that is. You call crying. What do you do? When your son calls you crying about anything, you're like, what do I do? What do I, that's just what we do, right? My mother's like, you'll be fine. I don't know why you want to know what we're having for dinner here because you can't eat it there. Go in the cafeteria and get some cereal. Like she talked me through it, right? And so I recognize too that when you haven't had that challenge, you don't know how resilient your child can be because you didn't go there. So you get that cry and you're like, oh, I should take her out of that school. And my cousin was saying that about her daughter, or I should let them come home. Maybe they shouldn't go away to college. What am I going to do? Like all those things that people do because they don't know what the experience is. And you're also on some level handicapping your child because you're not forcing them to be resilient, not forcing them to struggle through some things. And, you have to do that. I think about, times when I was a teacher and I used to teach math at the high school level, and I was recommending kids that were strong. I taught freshmen every single year. Freshmen drive you crazy. But students who were really strong, and I had a lot of kids of color in my class. I was teaching a standard level of college prep or whatever they called it. It wasn't an honors level class, but I saw kids and I saw promise in them. And I would call their parents because I knew they hadn't been through that, that experience. I'm like, they're going into the honors class next year. You are not to let them out unless you have to take them to the hospital for a nervous breakdown. It's going to be harder. They're going to want to get out of the class. They're going to cry to you about this. But you're going to make them stay in the class because they have the ability to do it. It's going to be hard. They're going to have to maybe get a tutor. They're going to maybe have to put more time into the work that they normally would do. But I think about doing that for some parents that could make all the difference in the world because they don't know that. And they, I could just sign the paper and say, you go into honors class and never have that conversation with a parent. And then when the kid starts to struggle, the parent's automatic is drop down a level. Go get. But because I know that, I'm making that phone call. That's the kind of stuff that we have to do for each other. That's the kind of thing that teachers should be doing with students when they're making those recommendations, is having the conversation so that the families know. When I was a principal and we had AP classes at the school, and it was, a lot of first gen kids, a lot of kids who were graduating from high school for the first time. And I was amazed by that because my grandparents graduated from high school. So it wasn't even like, it was just an expectation, right? But really having those conversations, like we used to have meetings with parents about AP classes. This is going to be hard. This is not going to hurt your child. They're going to have to, manage their time differently. We're not letting them drop out of the class, period. And people
showing that level of love, showing that level of faith, showing that level of you are worthy, your child is worthy. I think that is the thing that is missing in most schools these days. It's that same, like you said, it takes a village in the very beginning of our conversation. And I think it's that same village or community mentality where we all need to help to keep our parents engaged, to help our children stay motivated, to allow them to understand that they can accomplish these things. Because I'm one of those parents, like my son's crying, nope, he don't got to do it. Right?
Girl, don't do it.
Right, but so this is like your first instinct because you think that you're protecting, but it's really like you are actually like stifling them on certain levels because they have to build up this resiliency. They have to know how strong they are so that they can be successful. And so I think it's an important lesson for all parents, especially single moms that go through that type of thing, that may feel a little bit more empathetic to their child, right? Like me. I think it's a really important lesson to understand that this is part of what real life will be for them. So this is the thing that will help them to get over it now, so that when they get into life and get into society and they're adults, that they're not challenged by it. It's not a struggle for them anymore. They just know, like, okay, I went through this in school, so I know how to navigate through this at this point. I think that's awesome. I think that's really, really a smart lesson for me, and hopefully to the moms out there too.
Absolutely. If nobody takes anything else from this, it's really like, understand what you don't understand and keep pushing. When you think about all that you've accomplished in your life, it hasn't been easy, but the accomplishments have been worth it. And I think sometimes we try to protect our children, our family, our nieces, our nephews, whatever it is, from hardship, when that's the same hardship we had that made us who we are. You know what I mean? And it's just, it's a hard thing. And especially when you don't know how to help someone with it, all you do is make a phone call to get the resource. Who do you know in your family? Everybody has that somebody in their family who, like, I'll show up. You need me to show up for your kids, for your kids' IEP meeting, I do it. You need me to show up for, to have a conversation, or what questions should you ask? There's usually somebody that who has that confidence and has that knowledge that you can reach out to, say, like, I don't really know how to approach this, but what do I do? And that's our responsibility in our community to each other.
That's right.
Is to do that,
That's right.
Is to step in and support people, where they need the help and where they need the support.
No, I agree 1,000%. Nicole, I want to thank you so much for being a part of the show. I mean, you've given us so much information around educating our children, what's important for us as parents, which I think is super, super important for us to really be able to receive and take in, and really make adjustments in our child's life and in our lives, so that we can better serve our children, and also allowing us to understand that there are people like yourself and other educators that are really working to try to change that dynamic of education for these young boys and girls of color that have gone through or are afraid to go through different challenges in their school career. I think it's important to teach them resiliency. I think it's important to help them to understand that they are worthy of great things, and to put them on a track for that. And so for those things, for those lessons that you brought to us, I thank you. And I'm sure that there are however many parents out there listening, they are thanking you too. And we applaud you for your great work. Do you know if you will stay in education? Is that always going to be the thing? Or what's next for you?
I think about, at what point have I exhausted the education piece? The purpose of education is economic independence, right? And so I wonder if the next step is, like, how do we make sure that there is wealth in our community? And I don't mean resource. Like, I feel like I'm well resourced. Like, if you need a couple dollars, I can help you out. But wealth, where we can help each other grow our businesses, right, where we can pick up the phone and make a call, like those kind of connections. And I think that's something that's missing in the community. And I see that as a trajectory or a next step. I don't really know. I'm going to work on Tuesday, since Monday's a holiday. I'm going to work on Tuesday as usual. But I think about, like, I keep getting to this place of, like, why education? Why are we trying to be educated? And we're trying to be educated so we can be economically stable, economically independent. And so, I think about that a lot. I do think about that a lot.
Well, I think that that's smart, and I think it's a good trajectory for you. I think it's right in line. Even when you went to school for finance and business, you have a knack for numbers. So I actually think it's a really smart course for you. I encourage you to continue on and bring it back to us. When you start to educate yourself more on that stuff, we'd love to hear from you again, and we'd love to have you back on the show.
Thank you. I really commend you for doing this show, for getting the word out, for sharing resources, because a lot of times we just don't even know where to begin to look for things, right? And I think that, the work that you're doing is amazing. So I applaud you for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you guys for staying tuned in for another episode of Engage, Motivate, and Elevate with Monet Fox. And we will see you next time.
It is now time to elevate.
Time to motivate them.
Let's engage. It is now time to elevate.